This talk was given by Roshi Rafe Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
Today is Saturday, January 25th, and for the teisho today, and starting today, and this series will run for a number of weeks, I finally feel that the book I've been working on is in a position or ready enough to begin sharing and see if it stands on its own, if it has legs. The title of it, tentatively, is A Zen Life of Pilgrimage, Coming Home, and subtitled is What Zen is Really All About. It's been in some ways odd working on this book, which is kind of a summation in some ways of my many years of practice and some years of teaching, because we live in right now a very difficult time. In some ways, a really disturbing time, where the very questions of our deepest humanity are on the plate every day. And really looking at what's the relevance of Zen to all of this brought up a lot for me. So it somehow seems the right time to begin sharing this. And we'll begin with the quotes that lead into the book itself. So here's a selection for you to give you a sense of what these chapters are going to be about. This first quote is from Bob Dylan, from his opening words in Martin Scorsese's documentary, No Direction Home. I had ambitions to set out and find, like an odyssey of going home somewhere. I set out to find this home that I'd left a while back and couldn't remember exactly where it was, but I was on my way there. I was born very far from where I'm supposed to be, and I'm on my way home, you know. How about that, you Zen students? How about that? Let me repeat that one. It gives me chills. This is Bob Dylan speaking probably 30 years ago. I had ambitions to set out and find, 20 years ago, I had ambitions to set out and find, like an odyssey of going home somewhere. I set out to find this home that I'd left a while back and couldn't remember exactly where it was, but I was on my way there. I was born very far from where I'm supposed to be, and so I'm on my way home, you know? How about that? Now, here's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and a book he wrote called Flight to Arras, which was about a near-suicidal reconnaissance mission during World War II that he never thought he would survive. Human anguish is the product of the loss by man of his true identity. For want of knowing who I am suspended in anguish. How about that? Seems familiar somehow, doesn't it? Now, here's Geoffrey Chaucer, Canterbury Tales. Than longen folk to go on pilgrimages, and palmers for to seken strange strands, to ferne halls quoth in sundry landes, and specially from every sheer's end of England to Canterbury they wende, the holy blissful martyr for to sake that him hath holpen, one that they were sake. Now, here's Hakuin. Do not lament about how far away it is. Is there anything nearer than to see your own eyeballs with your own eyeballs? Do not be afraid about how deep a thing is. If you try and see and hear it at the bottom of a deep chasm or in the depths of the sea, then you may well fear how deep a thing is. Is there anything nearer than to see your own mind with your own mind? To use your own nostrils, to smell your own nose? Although the world is in a degenerate age, the law, that is the Dharma itself, is not degenerate. This is letter to an old nun of the Hokke sect by Hakuin. Now how about this? This is from Zen Master Ikkyu. Every day, priests minutely examine the law and endlessly chant complicated sutras. Before doing that, though, they should learn how to read the love letters sent by the wind and rain, the snow and moon. Before doing that, though, they should learn how to read the love letters sent by the wind and rain, the snow and moon. Now, how about this from Su Tung Po, one of the great Zen poets? Mount Lu in misty rain, the river Che at high tide, when I had not been there, no rest from the pain of longing. I went there and returned. It was nothing special. Mount Lu in misty rain, the river Che at high tide. How about that? Mount Lu in misty rain, the river Che at high tide, when I had not been there, no rest from the pain of longing. I went there and returned. It was nothing special. Mount Lu in misty rain, the river Che at high tide. Now here's one from Herman Melville, Moby Dick. It's not down in any map. True places never are. That's it. It's not down in any map. True places never are. And now, from the Odyssey itself, Homer, Emily Wilson translation, which is a new one, a very interesting translation. Now I will make a prophecy the gods have given me, and I think it will all come true, although I am no prophet. He will not be gone much longer from his own native land, even if chains of iron hold him fast. He will devise a means of getting home. That's from the first book of the Odyssey, and that's Athena, the goddess of wisdom, speaking. She's transformed herself into an old friend of Telemachus and Odysseus, named Mentes. He will devise a means of getting home. Finally, a personal anecdote to end our quotes. I was having lunch with Aitken Roshi in an Italian restaurant in Honolulu, and I asked him, Roshi, what is this Zen thing anyway? Why do we do it? He answered quickly, saying, happiness. And then he stopped, put down his fork, and sat quietly thinking, as if he'd noticed something not quite right. It seemed he'd caught himself mouthing a cliche. Then he looked at me and said, no. Many people in this world are happy. They are absorbed in their work or family or hobbies. No longer caught up in themselves, they're happy. But if impermanence has bitten too deeply, and a yearning for something more, a way to be at peace in the face of impermanence itself has taken root, then Zen can show you the way to happiness. Zen can show you the way to happiness. So again, to repeat, the title of this book is A Zen Life of Pilgrimage, Coming Home, what Zen is really all about. So, first chapter begins, or the introduction, actually. We won't probably get much further than into the first chapter today, but here's the introduction. Early in the winter of 2024, my wife Rose journeyed with her Zen teacher, Sunyana Graf Roshi, abbot and founder of the Vermont Zen Center, and her extended Sangha to India, where they visited such Buddhist pilgrimage sites as Lumbini, the Buddha's birthplace, Kapilavastu, his hometown, Bodh Gaya, where he realized enlightenment, Vulture Peak, where he often taught, Kushanagara, where he died, and other places of note. Once she was home, her moving account of her trip got me thinking about pilgrimage in general, as well as reminiscing about pilgrimages we'd gone on together to Zen sites in both China and Japan. Of course, like most of us, I also have a rather general sense that our life is itself a pilgrimage. But as I listened to her account of her travels, as I myself was nearing the end of my 70s, I found questions like, to what? And where am I headed? What is the point? Moving up to the front burner. This book grew out of that and is essentially a summation of how Zen Buddhism, which I've practiced formally for over 50 years and have been teaching now for over a dozen, looks at this life, our life, as a pilgrimage, and how it can help us pilgrims all proceed more happily and meaningfully on our way. A verse from Arriving Within Concurrence, a section of Tungshan's, Tozan in Japanese, 5 ranks or modes, a text we explored toward the conclusion of koan practice, may give us a sense of direction. The quote is not falling into being or non-being. Who can be in accord with this? Everyone longs to leave the eternal flux, not just to live in harmony, but to return and sit by the charcoal fire. Everyone longs to leave the eternal flux, not just to live in harmony, but to return and sit by the charcoal fire. This is one of Zen's reminders that essentially we human beings long not for rare and esoteric wonders, but rather to truly and naturally be at home. Which sounds good, but there is a problem. How can we be happy in a home where nothing lasts? A monk asked Dalung, "The physical body ultimately decomposes. What is the indestructible Dharma body?" Dalung answered, "The mountain flowers cover the hillside like brocade. The valley streams are blue as indigo." Remember, the question was, the physical body ultimately decomposes. What is the indestructible Dharma body? He answered, "The mountain flowers cover the hillside like brocade. The valley streams are blue as indigo." That's the Blue Cliff Record, case 82. So Dalung, would be Daryu in Japanese, looks squarely at our terror of impermanence and finds his and our home right in it, which is quite an answer, one that seems to have worked for the monks and nuns of old. But is the realization it points to and the living that flows from it accessible to ordinary people with families, relationships, and careers living in our complex world today? 2,500 years ago, a painful collision with the terrifyingly universal facts of sickness, aging, and death drove a 29-year-old Nepalese prince named Siddhartha Gautama to abandon his comfortable life as a member of the 1% of his time and seek and find an answer to how to live peacefully, happily, and meaningfully in the face of the disaster of a time-factored, temporary existence. Zen springs from that quest and from the fulfillment that ex-prince, as the awakened sage, Shakyamuni Buddha, ultimately found and taught. The monk who came to Dalung some 1,500 years after that in China was seeking that same vital answer, as do many of those taking up the practice of Zen today. I say many because many also begin to practice Zen for more obvious reasons of physical or mental well-being, such as gaining a greater sense of calm in their busy lives. The fundamental question, the one the Buddha faced, as did Dalung's monk, as well as us today, in an increasingly troubled world, comes down to some form of, how can I be at home, at peace, and actually happy in our impermanent world of endless change? And it is perhaps especially in our faces today, given the increasing degree of selfishness, anxiety, injustice, anger, and ignorance we daily face. Is happiness possible unless I either choose to shut my eyes and ignore what's actually happening or simply wear rose-colored glasses? Lay Zen practice, which is the core of Western Zen practice, is a fulfillment of the Buddha's message that awakening is possible for each of us. Lay Zen practice does not see our ordinary lives as obstacles to our maturing, but as the vehicles of our growth. Why? because enlightenment is our natural birthright, already who we are, if we only realized it. As we each have this same potential for wisdom and compassion, we can, even today, like the Buddha, realize and live this truth to our own ability and degree. As lay Zen practitioners especially, if our aim is to be whole and be at home here on this earth, the challenges, responsibilities, joys and sorrows of careers, family, friendships, as well as local, national, and planetary citizenship offer us opportunities to mature every day. What will be transmitted to the next generation of Zen practitioners and the next and the next? My hope is that it will be the core that the Buddha himself tirelessly sought and found and taught, realization or enlightenment, another term for which is intimacy. But what is that? The good or the bad news, depending on how you view it, is that no one gets something called enlightenment. Why? Because enlightenment or intimacy, and how do you get intimacy, is a momentary falling away of identification with the very concept of a me, myself, and I that wants to be enlightened. The world in all its unique variety steps in and realizes itself. The taste of this tea is me. The sound of the distant bell is me. The color of the vast blue sky is me. This placeless place is home. We are intimate, whole, and complete, just as we are. Nothing has been added. We've just found what until now we failed to see, that missing piece, the ground beneath our feet. Zen practice is a pilgrimage toward this seemingly missing wholeness, the half-remembered country we've come from and live from, if we only knew it. My old friend and Dharma transmission teacher, Dainin Henry Roshi, told me about an incident that had moved him deeply when visiting our old teacher, Roshi Philip Kapleau, down in Mexico. They were walking down a dirt lane just outside the town of Tepoztlan, Morelos province, when a rooster came strutting along the lane all on its own. Roshi stopped and just stood there, leaning on his walking stick, looking and looking and looking at that rooster. Finally, he turned to Dainin and with a huge smile on his face declared, "Michael," that was Dainin's name before his ordination as a Zen priest, "Michael, have you ever seen anything so wonderful?" Now remember, earlier in life, Roshi Kapleau had been the chief court reporter for both the Nuremberg and the Tokyo war crimes tribunals. Taking down the details of that horrific testimony of devastating evil changed him. He heard firsthand all the terrible things human beings who lacked any sense of intimacy with life or with their own humanity could do and had done. Like Prince Siddhartha 2,500 years ago, who'd walked from his palace and was shaken to the core by a sudden encounter with aging, sickness, and death, that dramatic courtroom experience crushed the life Philip Kapleau had lived up till then. And it led him, not many years later, to sell his court reporting business and head back to Japan, this time to train in Zen. So that stunningly radiant smile of complete and utter happiness at the sight of that rooster was no trivial thing. It was an expression of what Zen had opened to him. What was that? Where did that radiant smile come from? And how do I, living in these troubled times, find that same kind of simple joy, is what I wanted to know. Isn't it perhaps what we'd all like to know? To begin, we'll look at 3 Zen koans, of each of which look at one particular Zen ancestor, but at 3 different stages in his life: just before his initial awakening, shortly after that awakening, and then a number of years down the road. We'll see if and how he changed or matured, after which we'll look at 6 other Zen koans and 1 traditional Buddhist tale to further explore our themes of pilgrimage, maturing, and homecoming, and see where they lead. And now, to close this introduction, a senryu, which is a Japanese haiku-like humorous verse. It goes like this. Ah, how edifying, the Holy Sutra that is coming to an end. Ah, how edifying, the Holy Sutra that is coming to an end. That's by someone named Tofu, and it is a R.H. Blythe translation. William Blake, our wise old man of the West, his dates are 1757 to 1827, put it even more succinctly in the Proverbs of Hell from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, a wonderful short Blake prophetic book. If you don't know it, it's extremely Zen-like. I suggest you take a look. He wrote, enough or too much. That's the introduction. Enough or too much. We will start the first chapter. I don't know how far into it we'll get, but we shall see. Chapter 1, Deshan, Japanese that would be Toksan, his dates are 780 to 865, carries his backpack, part 1. So, in working through the koan curriculum, the 3 koans focusing on Zen Master Deshan do not appear in chronological order. I'm arranging them in that order here so we can see the story of a life pilgrimage that they reveal. In this, I am following a wise suggestion made to me some years ago by Dane and Henry Roshi. First, a note about koans in general. In a 2008 interview with Poetry Foundation, the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, environmentalist, Zen elder, and countercultural icon Gary Snyder spoke to the point when asked about koans. Here's what he had to say. What a tricky task the koan has. It must challenge the student and draw her into it, but not give away enough to make her think she understands it. Koans are not poetry as a rule and do not aspire to being poetry, but are some type of simple teaching story that is a little bit like a riddle. If bright people could read koans and then simply get it, they wouldn't be koans. The intention of a koan is to make people who are bright in an ordinary way, or ordinary people who are bright in an odd way, work harder and go further into themselves. The language presents an opportunity to perceive a metaphor that calls one not to thought, but to work. Work is performance. Performance is embodiment and not subject to ordinary rational analysis. It must spring forth freely and spontaneously, as does life for most working people who are always dealing with the immediate. That's one kind of koan. So in a way, we're not talking about language, we're talking about the theater of life. For this to actually work, it needs the relation of student and mentor, in this case a qualified Zen Roshi, typically in the Rinzai tradition, going into the teacher's room and trying out your view of the koan on him or her is the only way to move through it. Without the mentor, you only dig yourself deeper into the hole, or you make up your own answer, which is invariably wrong. This remarkable practice, developed and handed down for 1,000 years and more, is very refined and does not fit any exact paradigm of philosophy, rational analysis, or aesthetic strategy, yet it throws light on them all. I have no doubt that the Buddhist teachings are grounded in the remarkable, almost unique, exquisitely relevant insights of Gautama Shakyamuni, who's well named the Buddha, the realized one. The koans, also known as the kungan, public cases, as in law cases, they set a public record clear, or teaching phrases of Chan, Buddhist Chan, or Zen, Buddhist practice, go back to his mind and his insight. In other words, the koans present the mind and insight of the Buddha, but in action. Now, references to koan collections created in China roughly 1,000 years ago, as well as one created in Japan a bit later, will be referenced, will appear. Here we go, editing away. Throughout this book, these koan collections remain essential training texts for koan practitioners today. Teachers east and west who have themselves worked through these collections in the face-to-face, teacher-to-student formalities of the doksan, doksan room. Doksan is a Japanese word, means going alone, which is what a koan student does in working with a teacher. Such teachers as myself who've gone through the koan curriculum use them to check, encourage, and mature students who choose koans as their path of practice. The Gateless Barrier, or Wumen Quan, cases, commentaries, and verses by Zen Master Wu Men of 12th century China is the first formal book of koans we work on after passing the first gate koans of Mu, The Sound of a Single Hand, and several follow-ups, followed by the 50 to 100 brief koans known as miscellaneous, preliminary, or introductory koans. After Gateless Barrier comes the Blue Cliff Record, Chinese is Pian Lu, Japanese is Hekikan Book of Serenity, comes after that the Kongron Lu, or Japanese Shoyoroku, and then the Transmission of the Lamp, which is in Japanese Denkoroku, in that order. And finally, we explore Tungshan's 5 modes or ranks or modes, as well as the 16 bodhisattva precepts as koans. Now, koans are not a required form of practice. We all start with counting breath and then experiencing the breath. Eventually, some students may decide to take up an inquiry like, who is hearing? Others continue with ongoing breath practice. A few might choose to do just sitting, which is shikantaza, but most of those I work with select to work on koans, which makes sense as it was my own path of formal Zen training and is one I have the most experience with and am most enthusiastic about. After all, having initially begun my professional life as a graduate student of mythopoeic literary criticism, and having gone on to develop a career as both an author and a performing storyteller, my personal interest has always been in story, and koans are the folktales of Zen, which is something that one of my Zen teachers, Robert Aitken Roshi, liked to point out. So, case 28 of the Gateless Barrier, often traditionally titled Lungtan, or Japanese Ryutan, blows out a candle, could also be called Daishan carries his backpack, which establishes it as the first part of our chronologically reconfigured trilogy of koans featuring Daishan, the series being Daishan carries his backpack, Daishan carries his bundle, Daishan carries his bowls. The first koan, then, in this chronological order is as follows. So here's the story, which we begin our pilgrimage into Zen with in this book. Daishan went to Lungtan and questioned him sincerely far into the night. It grew late, and Lungtan said, "You'd better retire." Daishan made his bows and lifted the blinds to withdraw, but was met by darkness. Turning back, he said, "It's dark outside." Lungtan lit a candle and handed it to him. As Daishan was about to take it, Lungtan blew it out. At this, Daishan had sudden realization and made obeisance. "What truth did you discern?" asked Lung Tan. Deshan replied, "From now on, I will not doubt the words of any of the great Zen masters of the world." The next day, Lung Tan took the high seat before his assembly and declared, "Among you monks, there is a brave fellow whose fangs are like swords and whose mouth is like a bowl of blood. Strike him with a stick, and he won't turn his head to look at you. One day he will climb the highest peak and establish his way there." Deshan brought his notes and commentaries on the Diamond Sutra before the Dharma Hall and held up a torch, saying, "Even though one masters all the profound teachings, it is like placing a single hair in vast space. Even though you have learned all the secrets of the world, it is like throwing a drop of water into a vast ravine." And he burned up all his notes. Then, making his vows, he took leave of his teacher. Well, while lengthy, this koan actually needs some backstory, which Master Woman supplies in his commentary to the case. So the commentary to this whole long story goes like this. Before Deshan had left his home, his mind was indignant and his tongue sharp. Full of arrogance, he went south to exterminate the doctrine of the special transmission outside the sutras. When he reached the road to Licho, he sought to buy refreshments from an old woman at a roadside tea stand. The old woman said, "Venerable monk, what are all those books you're carrying on your back?" Deshan said, "They are my notes and commentaries on the Diamond Sutra." The old woman said, "I hear the Diamond Sutra says, past mind cannot be grasped, present mind cannot be grasped, future mind cannot be grasped. Which mind does your reference intend to refresh?" Deshan was dumbfounded and could not answer. Unable to die the great death under the old woman's words, he asked, "Is there a Zen master nearby?" The old woman said, "Master Lung Tan lives about half a mile from here." Arriving at Lung Tan's monastery, Deshan was utterly defeated. His earlier words certainly did not match his later ones. As for Lung Tan, he seemed to have lost all sense of shame in his compassion for his son. Finding a bit of live coal in the other, he took up muddy water and drenched him, destroying everything at once. Looking at the matter calmly, you can see it was all a farce. Now, some backstory on the backstory. You see, Deshan was a noted scholar of the Diamond Sutra, and as such upheld the classical Buddhist teaching of a many-lifetime path aspiring bodhisattvas must traverse to gain mastery of the 10 stages of enlightenment and eventually reach Buddhahood. This included study of the sutras and of the Vinaya moral ethical teachings, as well as the practice of the 10 paramitas, or perfections: generosity, which is dana; morality, which is shila; patient forbearance, which is kshanti; zeal or vigor, which is virya; focused meditation, which is jhana; wisdom, which is prajna; skillful means upaya; resolve pranidhana; spiritual power bala; and knowledge jnana, all of which are summed up in the Buddha's eightfold path of right view, right resolve, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditative awareness. Right essentially meaning unself-centered, non-harming. Classical Buddhist tradition asserts that, maintained over lifetimes, this path ultimately leads to the progressive stages of bodhisattva realization to complete and perfect Buddhahood. The canonical Jataka tales, one of which is included in this book, past life tales of the Buddha as human as well as non-human beings, animal, spirit, or God, which are the folk tales of Buddhism, demonstrate the ceaseless work involved, none of which is discounted by Zen. But Zen holds that there is another way up, a way to awake to Buddha now, just as we are. In this, Zen acknowledges the primacy of the Buddha's own great awakening. The words tradition ascribes to him at that profound moment are wonder of wonders. All beings are Buddhas, fully endowed with all wisdom and virtue. Only their habit of dualistic, delusional, self-centered thinking prevents realization of this. Now, Deshan, a classical Buddhist, was a gradualist, and for him, Zen would have looked like heresy. That it was flourishing in the south of China seems to have infuriated him. Those liars, those cheats. Bodhidharma's legacy of pointing directly to mind itself, furthered by the six patriarchs' teaching of dustless mind, ironically, opened by hearing a verse from Deshan's beloved Diamond Sutra, had to be dealt with, and Deshan, was just the man to do it. He was such a noted authority on the Diamond Sutra that his nickname was Diamond Joe, Z-H-O-U, but like Diamond Joe or Diamond Charlie. And he was driven by a ferocious self-confidence. So, naturally, when he heard that Zen taught there was no need to rely on sutras or words, but that pointing directly to mind itself could enable anyone, even a supposed illiterate like Wei Nung, the sixth patriarch, to awake to original Buddhahood, he was incensed. Hitching a box of Diamond Sutra commentaries on his back, he marched off to give those Zen devils in the south what for. Arriving at a roadside stand where an old woman was selling tea and tea cakes, and the tea cakes back then were colloquially known as mind refreshers, he stopped, wiped his brow, and setting down his pack, asked for tea and mind refreshers. The old woman, a Zen granny who in less patriarchal times might have been guiding students or running a monastery herself, looked at Deshan and, sizing him up innocently, or so it must have seemed to our weary pilgrim, asked what he was carrying in that backpack. "In here, my good woman," came the response, "are commentaries on the Diamond Sutra." "Ah," she said as if awed. Blink, blink. "Please tell me, venerable sir, as I am an ignorant old woman, doesn't the Diamond Sutra say that past mind cannot be grasped, present mind cannot be grasped, future mind cannot be grasped? If so, venerable sir, which mind will you refresh? Tell me and I'll give you the mind refreshers for free. But if you can't, you'll get nothing." Stunned, Diamond Joe stood there slack-jawed, unable to answer. Pierced through by an old woman, he found his magnificent learning was of no use. He'd come to the end of his knowledge and had no answer. That heavy backpack of commentaries and notes he'd lugged all that way were rendered useless. And right here, in this, his first moment of utter darkness, is where his character shows. He does not strike out, get huffy, put on airs, or make excuses. He does not fall back on some version of, "You're just an old woman, what the hell do you know?" He's been bested and owns up to it, rising like a hungry fish to the bait the skillful Zen granny has lowered before his blood bowl of a mouth. He humbly asks, "Is there a Zen master nearby?" She answers, "Keep going. A half-mile down the road you'll come to Dragon Pond Monastery." The abbot, Zen master Lung Tan's name, meant dragon pond. So then the great scholar, Diamond Zhou, stripped of his bright and shining certainty, hefted his pack back up in his back, and trudged down the road to fall into Dragon Pond and drown. Only it's not so simple. Shibayama Roshi relates in Zen Comments on the Mumonkan that when Daishan first arrived, he announced, "I've come to the renowned Dragon Pond, but I see neither dragon nor pond." Proclaiming his scholarship, he's intellectually stating, all is empty as the Diamond Sutra teaches. What's more, he's asserting that the old abbot Lungtan is hardly imposing. "I see nothing," proclaims Daishan. Lungtan answers, "That's right, exactly so. You have arrived," which might mean this is Dragon Pond, and so you better be careful. Do you even understand what you're saying? Please remember to maintain a zazen posture during a teisho. If you're in pain, you can certainly change your posture. Just do so attentively. So changing posture is okay, and if you need to sit in seiza or sit with one knee up or anything like that, that's fine. But just do it attentively. But try not to sit in a kind of too informal pose, because teisho is itself a form of zazen. And so we try and keep that in mind with our body as well as with our attention. So now a word about Lungtan. He lived during the first part of the 9th century, was a disciple of the noted teacher Dao Wu, and came from a poor family who, interestingly, made their living selling pastry. So perhaps the old tea-selling woman who skewered Daishan with her mind refreshers was Lungtan's elderly mother, and she lived near the monastery, so who knows. Anyway, Dao Wu helped young Lungtan's family from time to time, and Lungtan, remember this is the teacher, Dragon Pond, was still a boy. He would bring him tea cakes by way of thanks, and eventually Lungtan chose to train in Zen under Dao Wu, who had been so kind to his impoverished family. Now, after a time, he said to his teacher, Dao Wu, "Since I came here, I've not received any essential teachings on the mind from you." Dao Wu replied, "Ever since you came, I have not for a moment ceased to give you essential instructions on the mind." Mystified, young Lungtan said, "How is that? I don't recall any such instruction." Dao Wu answered, "When you bring me tea, don't I accept it? When you bring me a meal, don't I eat it? When you gasho, don't I respond? How have I ever failed to show you the essence of mind?" Lungtan, it is said, remained silent, pondering this. Then Dao Wu said, "For true perception, you must see immediately. Once you start pondering and reflecting, you miss it." With these words, Lungtan's mind opened and he understood. This is all with some rewriting edits I've taken from John Woo's The Golden Age of Zen. After this initial face-off, Daishan's defenses seem to have come down, and the two talk far into the night. Gradually, Daishan's certainties, fixed beliefs, practiced arguments, stunning refutations, all fade away, leaving him in darkness. "It's dark out there," he says. Indeed. Now Lungtan reveals the brilliance of his dragon fire. He hands Daishan a candle, and then, as Daishan reaches for it, blows it out. Gone, gone, entirely gone, as the Prajnaparamita Heart of Perfect Wisdom Sutra says, right there, in that total darkness with everything, even his last clinging habitual thought of me and here and everything and everyone else out there, blown out, Daishan sees. This is what nirvana literally means, blown out, like a candle in the wind. All self-centeredness, all greed, anger, and ignorance are entirely blown out. This is Zen's great death and our return to full life. With this wonderful failure, as Wu Men calls it elsewhere, this complete and stunning loss, Deshan awakes to what until then had remained mere theory. It is a conversion experience to what until that moment he'd fervently disbelieved. He has indeed arrived at Dragon Pond and fallen in, moving from classical Buddhism's belief in Buddha to personal experience of Buddha. He's not Shakyamuni. He's Deshan. And we'll stop there and pick up this commentary on the koan next teisho, which will be next week.